You are listening to the Primitive Intelligence Podcast, episode 511, the Zuni Enigma. This is the one we've all been waiting for. Rocco's got, I cleared 500 gigabytes of hard drive space just to store all the information I know you got for this. I know you got a lot.
I'm glad. Unfortunately, you didn't clear enough, okay. So we're gonna have to get some more hard drive space.
Well, we'll muddle through, I think. So hopefully, this has been a weekly challenge for me to get the video and the audio right. And last week, I know my video was all off. So if you're watching this and you're not just listening to it, my audio sync was all sorts of off. There was a crash on the server that we use, and it took like an extra day to get the video file. And it just wasn't right. So I did the best with it I could. But hopefully, if that happens again, I might just do like the album artwork cover for that video and not deal with all the video hassle. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, so you've been researching this one for a little bit.
Yeah, this one, it's I can't necessarily, I said this before, I can't remember where I heard this or how I found it. My late father, he liked Native Americans, and he had some things, and maybe it was from there. I can't remember. But it's an actual nice, hardcover book, believe it or not, I picked up.
Real book?
I've been trying to go back in time a little bit with more tactile sensations, like actually real reading material and trying to stay away from computers. So I work in front of computers all day. So I'm trying to do something different, which is where this book came in.
Awesome.
And it ties into our last episode where you had been contemplating, let's say, what happens to societies? How could they just disappear? How could we have, how could humans have built such structures or roads or whatever it might be? And where did they go?
Well, that's what we're going to find out.
It ties into that. So it's going to be an interesting little story.
All right.
So I'm excited.
And it's going to be mostly your show here. So we're going to just let you run free with it. The Primitive Intelligence Podcast starts
now.
All right. Well, I'm curious to hear what you got after all this research. So I'm just going to hand it over to you and let you go.
Yeah. So first off, I'll say I felt like a kid again, actually sitting down reading and with a highlighter and taking notes. Everything has been digital for me for a long time. So the first thing I will say, this touches on a couple of different things. So it does speak about Native Americans, and the book sometimes will refer to them as Indians. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm trying to stick to the actual verbiage in the book. And it does touch on some thoughts that, maybe Columbus wasn't the first person to discover America. Yeah, and I don't want to offend anybody there.
Yeah, so that's nothing new.
Yeah. So mostly I'm going to stick with the book contents itself. I did do a little bit of research and a little bit of Googling, but I wanted us to stick with the actual content. And I don't know if in case anybody, I don't know if this is going to translate. The Zuni Enigma. It's by Nancy Yaw Davis. And a little bit about her. She was born in 1936, and she's still alive, living in Alaska. And she was a professor at a few universities. And when it comes to this book, she started her theoretical journey in March 1960. And it evolved over time, and eventually she presented her theory in May of 1988. So it's interesting. So it's not like today, sometimes it feels like people hammer out books and very quickly. Yeah. So she had some time. Where I'll start is, who are the Zuni? It's a good place to start. And they're a Native American Pueblo people who are believed to be in the northern New Mexico region for about 3,000 to 4,000 years. So it's a recent, maybe in what we think of as America, but they've been around for a while. The Zuni tribal name, and I apologize for butchering any names, is Ashiwi. So the Zuni name itself, some claim that it was a Spanish adaptation for a word of unknown meaning, so who knows where it came from. And there are others say that it's a derivation of another Pueblo tribe, the Caries, if I pronounce that correctly. So,
Okay.
So realistically, if you're going to search for anything, you can't search for Zuni, but Ashiwi.
How's that spelled?
And it's A''SHIWI.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I've been saying Ashiwi. So the Zuni tribe, I'll refer to it as the Zuni tribe.
Okay.
It's a Pueblo tribe, and there are 19 Pueblo tribes in North America. And that's good for context. So keep that in mind. 19 tribes. And as far as the information I have, Zuni is the largest tribe of over 10,000 people. So it's the story, or the interest, I guess where I'll start is that why are we talking about the Zuni? What's the deal? So the Zuni are distinct in the fact that they've managed to remain quite unaffected by other influences. They still claim the same land that they've always lived on, which is the size of Rhode Island. And that is saying a lot if they're still in the same land. And they also mainly reside in one city, which is in Zuni, New Mexico.
Right.
The interest, and I think this is sort of how I found an interest in them, is the language itself is distinct and not related to any other language. It does not have any affiliation to any other language in North America. And if you think about the other 19 Pueblo tribes, then you would have to imagine, how could it be so unique and distinct as a culture? Yeah. So that's where the story starts. So, what's the deal with the Zuni? What's their story? And is there any evidence that we have, or anything that we can find as far as why they might be unique, or what's really their story? And again, I wanted to stay true to the book, so I didn't actually look up the Zuni story itself to hear it from their words. It might be a good takeaway, but I'm going to consolidate what I have from this book as far as where they believe they came from and their journey itself as a people.
See, now it's interesting because I listened to that interview today with that Zuni elder, so I'm curious to see if what you say matches up with what he said.
I'm very curious too. And again, this book is not a new book. I believe this copy is from the year 2000. And again, the research started in 1960, and this kind of came out the theory came out in 1988. So I'm sure a lot has changed, or a lot of theories may have been influenced in the last few decades.
Yeah.
So the story itself, I'm consolidating it, but I'm going to try to hit the high marks. So the people themselves, they believe that they were not created. They were born from Mother Earth. So there was the Sun Father and the Mother Earth. And in the beginning, the earth was soft. There were no humans in the world. And the Sun Father used to travel across the earth and heard the cries of his children deep within the earth. And at one point, the Sun Father saw two columns of foam near a waterfall and gave them life. So basically created twin gods. and then ordered the twin gods to go into the earth, to go into Mother Earth, and free the people. So that I think is an interesting context where they were born and then were led by the twin gods on their journey to a certain extent.
Do these twin gods have names?
I don't have the names.
Okay.
There are names. Yes.
Okay.
There's a lot of names that I probably butcher, so I stayed away from them.
Yeah.
The story, and I'm a big fan of stories. So when the earth was young, they believed that there were many earthquakes, many and frequently, and they became wanderers. So they were looking for a stable and non-dangerous place to live.
Okay.
So led by the twin gods, they sought what they called the middle of the world under the pathway of the sun. So they just continued to move east along their journey. And the story itself says that they stopped many times, but earthquakes would always cause them to leave and move forward. And it's at this time that I'd also like to introduce the Japanese. So, in the Japanese, there is a speech attributed to the first emperor of Japan and a document from 697 AD. And this is interesting because we don't have a lot of, well, at least we're not taught a lot of stories about any other cultures that knew about America, except for the standard Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of thoughts. So this part of the speech from 697 AD, and I'm going to quote this from the book. It's, "Now I've heard from the ancient of the sea that in the east there's a fair land circled on all sides by blue mountains. I think this land will undoubtedly be suitable for the extension of the heavenly task, so that its glory should fill the universe. It is doubtless the center of the world." So,
and that was from Japan in 692.
This is 697, and this is supposedly from the first emperor of Japan. And there's discussions that at this point there were Buddhist monks that were basically traveling the world, or I shouldn't say the world, but what they knew as the world, and they're trying to settle and find other locations. And as I think you discussed in the last episode with the Olmecs and the Chinese,
yeah,
there was evidence that it sounds as though there were Chinese that visited the Olmecs to the point where someone was recognized as one of their own kind.
Yeah.
So I think this is also an interesting note that there is evidence that at least there was this thought process, a land beyond what they knew, and they believed that this would be a part of, what their world is. That would be important to them. Also, one thing to note is that if you think about the ocean and ocean cultures, there are a lot of, well, I should say a lot because I don't really know in context, but there were seashells that have been found in archaeological sites in the Southwest dating from 600 AD. So there had to be at least a trade route or some sort of travel from the Pacific into the Southwest bringing seashells. So there had to at least be a connection out that far. Now, to get back to the story, so the Zuni tribe has this tale in their tribe that they continue to move on because of all these earthquakes, because of all the problems in the environment. And we touch on some some dates and things that happened in Japan, or at least in that region.
Okay.
So the period of 732 to 741 was a decade of disasters. Storms, earthquakes, floods, droughts were widespread. Famine and plague followed. 600 years, in the next 600 years, between 1340 and 1350, there were a number of calamities that struck. There was civil war, there was a drought in 1340, an earthquake in 1341, smallpox in 1342, earthquakes in 1346, 1347, a drought in 1348, a typhoon, floods, and another earthquake in 1349. And there were so many disasters that in 1349 there was a custom for praying from the leaf of these of all of these calamities.
So this is in Japan?
According to the book, that this is a reference to Japan. I did not research to see if it necessarily was there, but according to this, yes.
Oh, this is a reference in Zuni culture to these disasters in Japan.
No, this is a connection that Nancy Yaw Davis makes to say, hey, even though the Zuni have these stories, in Japan, all of this happened.
Oh, okay. So
and it all happened from like 732, let's just say, up to like 1350.
Okay.
There was all of these problems that were that the peoples were experiencing. So to get back to the Zuni, so their story talks about, and this is what ties back to your thought process in the last episode about what happens to people. Where do they go? Where do they come from? Well, this story tells about a number of people that the Zuni met on their travels to find the middle. There was a story about how they met a people who taught them much about war. They thought they reached the middle, and they built homes, learned about war. There were many earthquakes. They died. People died in their houses. They moved forward. They stopped again. They met another people of the seed. So they found themselves in what they call the steam mist midst the waters, which they think is possibly hot springs. So they found peoples living in houses scattered over the hills. They won them over, and they integrated, and the children became one. But again, more calamities. So this one was interesting, is that there was a story about how eventual earthquakes, black smoke, fumes, fire, and thunder were encountered. And there is a thought process that this goes back to what could possibly be an eruption in Flagstaff, Arizona in the year 1064. So there is you could draw a line to some of these disasters that may have occurred. So then, of course, after this, they move on. And then they found another peoples who built high in the cliffs, and they owned fields, a lot of possessions, and had knowledge of irrigation. So they settled there. And that might tie into the Anasazi.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So there's all these stories, right? And eventually they came to a point where these groups split into three. There were people that moved north, people moved south, and then people that continued to move east. So I quickly go over their story because it is very interesting. I will butcher the names and the locations and the thought process about the certain locations that are unique and important to them. But I like the story that they at least continued to travel east, and they repeatedly met people. They either were, I'm assuming some were at war, but they learned from each peoples, they settled, they got knowledge, they integrated, and then they continued to move on. So that ties back, for me, into our thought process from the last episode. Where do some of these people go? And like this is it's possible that things may have occurred in the past. Either they integrated or there were natural disasters and people just moved on. So it's an interesting thought process as far as from where they started to where they currently are in Zuni, New Mexico. Where they were on this adventure or seeking the middle, seeking the promised land, if you will. So the question then becomes, if we're thinking that, or let's just say in the book, if there were a group of Japanese monks that landed on the East Coast, started to travel into America, and then eventually met up with the Zuni and integrated, where's the evidence? What do we have? And I say this a lot as far as what we know. Science or what we know, it's just all about what we know. So what's the evidence?
Right.
So the one thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, the language. So it's very unique to the Zuni itself. So both languages, and again, I'm not a linguist, so I couldn't tell you. But the resemblances are not only limited to certain vocabulary words, but to the syntactic structures and grammatical elements.
Okay. And this is
Take that
between
for what it is.
What, Zuni and what?
The Zuni and the Japanese.
Okay.
So the most interesting part is that both languages exhibit a preference for using subject, object, verb order, which is relatively rare among all of the world's languages. And thinking about, well, you have, even if you think about the tribes that exist now, if the culture all grew up in a similar region, you would assume that there should be some similarities.
Yeah.
And that could be an explanation of why their language is so unique. There are a few words that I'll mention. There is a list of words. Whether or not they are derivatives of themselves, I'm not one to say. But there's a Zuni word for clan, which is K-W-E, Kui. In Japanese, it's Kwai, K-W-A-I. The word for clown is N-E-W-E, Niwi, if you will.
For clown?
And yeah.
They had clowns back then?
Well, I can't say what the definition of clown was, but
okay.
A clown. And in Japanese, it was Niwaka, N-I-W-A-K-A.
That's just similar.
Similar. In Zuni, priest is Shawani, S-H-A-W-A-N-I. In Japanese, it's Shiwani, S-H-I. Oh, I think I might have that backwards.
That just verifies how close
in Japanese, it's Shawani. And in Zuni, it's Shiwani, S-H-I-W-A-N-I.
That's close.
So I might have had those backwards. Right. So there are some similar words, and they do go into more context about not originations, but similarities. Some of the words to me, I wouldn't know the difference. I would say no, they're not related, but I wouldn't be one to know.
You got to also look at how they were pronounced too, because just because we read it the way it would be American doesn't mean that's their pronunciation for letter combinations may be completely different. So it may look like a different word, but it may be pronounced the same or similar.
And I would actually like to. Well, I would like to hear from someone from the Zuni tribe to see if we had, let's say, an example of how someone from China went to the Olmecs and they could read or things look familiar. It'd be interesting to see. There is a reference in here from a soldier from, I believe it was World War II, was able to learn the Japanese language easily, and it seemed easier than normal. Again, that could be coincidence. but it's an interesting tie.
Yeah.
So other similarities, and again, we're drawing a wide bow here, but it's interesting. So other similarities that are brought up is their appearance itself, as we discussed with the Olmecs and the Chinese. There have been, well, according to the book, there are people who have traveled abroad who say the Zuni resemble the Japanese, especially those from Kyoto or relocated Tibetans. So that's interesting. The height of the people, at least according to the book, at least 2 early studies of Zuni remains revealed distinctive changes in the skeletal measurements, suggesting new additions to the gene pool about the 13th century. So about that 1350, where there were so many disasters, it possibly there was an introduction of a new people. They also mentioned that the Japanese skulls and skeletons have characteristics consistent with those changes. They're broader and smaller crania and a shorter stature. So, again, without any genetic evidence, we're making an assumption here. The Zuni people, for some reason, their skeletons changed. Why, we don't know. And we can't say. All we could do is guess. The one thing that I found was interesting in this that I would have never thought of before, I would have never even approached the topic, but they discussed teeth. And apparently, teeth have characteristics. I had no idea.
No, why not?
But according to this, one study found that the Zuni dental features, even though they're distinctive in some ways, closely fit more to California Native Americans than with their neighbors in the Southwest. And there are also studies that have shown 3 modern dental features that are clearly separate from other Native Americans and might be explained with a mixture with the Japanese. So, again, characteristics within the teeth that are different from other Native Americans. So it's another tie. And here's an interesting one. What is referred to as the Zuni disease. And if you really want to hear me butcher something,
it can't be worse than anything I've done.
Now, mesangiopathic glomerulonephritis. How about that?
Well,
so anyway,
if you pronounce it right or not, I don't want it.
Good. No, but what they were calling the Zuni disease, it's referred to, and they have an exceptionally high incidence of this disease, which causes chronic renal failure, ultimately leading to end-stage renal disease and death. So it's higher than, there were some statistics, but these statistics could be decades old, so I didn't actually jot them down. But the disease itself is also reported to be common in some Oriental populations, per the book, and best described in Japan and Singapore. So it's interesting that there is this disease that is not unique, but is characteristic of the Zuni, that also has ties to possibly Japanese ancestry.
I might have found an easier way of pronouncing that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chronic kidney disease.
You nailed it, man. You're pretty good.
I'm looking it up, and it's a CKD, chronic kidney disease.
But I did find that interesting. If I'm more scientific, where I'm trying to tie things to something substantial. And this is where I'm going to, again, in her book, she says, time will tell. She might be wrong, but it requires further research. And she mentions that one of her ideas for this came from when she was looking at the yin-yang symbol. And again, yin-yang, you think Chinese, but she found resemblances to a Zuni chart on Zuni religion. Now, I was searching for the chart or something to tie it together. I didn't necessarily find it, but if that's what started her on her journey, I applaud her if there was some sort of, an interest there. There was also resemblances to a chrysanthemum, which is which is important in their religion, and the Rosetta from Japan. And I've shared an image with you that you can put in the notes. Again, it looks similar, but it's a flower. So again, you could draw a bow there that there are some connections, or it could just be a flower.
Yeah.
And the last thing I would find that's interesting is and I don't know how true this is. I was trying to find it, but according to the book, there is a petroglyph that was found, in the region, and it's basically a box with a plus sign in the middle of it. So just a box with a cross.
Okay. And
this is it's a petroglyph that was found in the region, and the tie there is the Zuni word. I'm going to butcher this. Taiya. TA'Iya.
Okay.
Means a place of planting. So in Japanese, TA is a rice field, and in Zuni, IYA or LLIYA refers to a place. So although this little symbol, which is a square and a plus sign, in Japanese, that is a symbol for a rice field. And the Zuni word is quite possibly TA, meaning rice, and the place you plant rice. Even though they didn't have rice, it would have been more or less corn.
Yeah.
But the theory goes is that it's possible that the word for a place of planting might really have originated for a rice field. At least that's what's interesting to me. That's what I was really hoping to find, an actual picture of this petroglyph, to see if I could find it.
Yeah, I'm looking now.
I couldn't find it.
That is interesting.
To me, it's very interesting that, like, if you're talking about a place of planting, there's also a discovery that could be a symbol for a rice field, and the place for planting could be literally a breakdown of the Japanese word for rice and the place for planting.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting discussion. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence, and there's also discussion about, well, if the Zuni people wanted, at this point, back when these thoughts these theories were being, created or thought about, there really wasn't a lot of genetic testing. But today, there quite possibly be some genetic testing to see if there is any kind of Japanese heritage. But for me, the thought of the story of whether it's Buddhist monks or whoever it might have been, who left the region, traveled across the Pacific, landed possibly on the shores of California, and then made their way into the desert, or what we know today as the desert, met people, or maybe they settled. Maybe these could have been one of the groups of people that settled. Maybe they were the planters. Maybe they were the people who planted the seed or they were growing. And then, whether it was calamity or something made them move forward, eventually they just adapted each other's cultures until they settled where they are today.
This isn't saying that the Zuni are Japanese, but there was heavy Japanese influence and maybe integration.
It's more or less the theory that there was integration, and if so, that would explain the changes to the name, or the language. So it could have had the influences to why the language is so unique, and also to, let's say, some of the genetic changes that occurred or they believe to have occurred since, like, say, 1350. There were also references in the book to pottery and possibly, glazed pottery and smelting and things like that. But again, I personally believe that humans are very smart. All humans are very smart. And I think eventually people will discover technologies. So I can't say, and I don't necessarily believe that we have to, one culture has to rely on another culture to come up with pottery or smelting. I think people are very intelligent, so I didn't really include stuff like that. But I tried to at least include some things there's something to think about,
Here's something to think about. I just sent you an image of the flag of Zuni, New Mexico. I'll put that in the show notes.
Huh. That's kind of interesting.
Square flag with a circle with a plus sign in the middle.
So I just sent you a screenshot of an excerpt from the book that shows what, of course this is from a typographical image, but it's just a square with a plus. So that's interesting.
Did you, was that text or did you email? Oh, there it is. I got it.
There it is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so it's like the full square.
It's a full square. But we're talking about, this is from a book, not a drawing. So when I was looking online, there could be different stylizations, but it's still, that's interesting. The chrysanthemum and the rosetta, the rosetta is very important, and I don't have my notes, these notes in front of me, but I know at one point, I think it was in World War II, the rifles were stamped with the rosetta.
Yeah.
And at the end of the war, when one of the terms is like, when World War II is when there was the admission of defeat, one of the requests is that before we turn our guns in, we have to grind off the rosetta from the guns, because it's such an important aspect of the Japanese culture. And again, there is this chrysanthemum, is I believe what they were calling it, which is a flower and a design which very closely resembles the rosetta. But again, I think all cultures, if you're going to draw a flower, you could, you might be able to get to the same drawing or similar drawing.
Yeah. As soon as I saw that symbol with the square and a cross, it made me think of like a rune more than like a Japanese symbol, like a like a Nordic symbol or a rune. But I couldn't find anything.
And if that was just a petroglyph by itself, to me, again, you could read into a lot of this.
Yeah.
But the fact that the word for rice in Japanese is ta, and in Zuni, let's say Iya is a place. So you have a place for rice or a place for planting. It's so similar that, it's really intriguing to me. Like
Yeah.
it's just, to me, there's a lot of similarities here. Or I would, and if this isn't the answer, I would be really interested to find out how, how these people's language changed from what it was to what it is, if everyone around them had a common way of speaking. How did the structure change?
Yeah, usually it may not be identical, but there would be some bleed through from culture to culture that neighbor.
Right.
That doesn't seem like that's the case here.
So that's the story, and unfortunately, I have no evidence. I have nothing, but for me, it's the story.
It's the best story. Never have evidence.
And I love the idea of a group of people traveling across the Pacific in a boat, and who knows when. It could have been, 1000 AD, whenever it was, who reaches the shore and then just continues to travel until they meet another people and then just become one tribe and just integrate. In a world today where there's so many differences and people are focused on differences, they found a commonality and continued.
Yeah,
and that's what I want to think.
Did the author say where she got all this information from? Just through her own research, or did she speak to anybody?
There are, you really would need to look into the book. There are a lot of references to a lot of other studies. And so she does tie on or tie back to a lot of other studies that were done. Okay. It was her idea, and she tried to find commonalities, but she does tie things back to other studies that were done. Okay.
The reason why I'm asking is so knowing what you were going to talk about today, I sat down while I was working today and put on a podcast from 2020. I don't remember the name of the podcast. I'll put the link in there. It was like Our Ancient Earth or something like that was the name of the podcast. And he sat down and did an interview with Clifford Mahudi, who was a Zuni elder. And at this point, like, he had spoken to this guy a few times. So they had a rapport. And at this point, this Clifford Mahudi was basically booted out of the council because he was starting to spread information about the Zuni, the tribes, their origins, and all this information that the council didn't think should be given out. And he's even saying that, like, at that point, now he passed away in 2022. So this is just a couple of years before he died, this interview. But he said that even in 2020, the Zuni, the Pueblo Zuni in New Mexico only practice about 20% of the the rituals and the celebrations that they did even 100 years ago. So, like, their culture was just not even being forgotten. It was just not being shared at all. So when the Spanish came through, and they basically, most of the Zuni converted to Christianity, and it was not, nobody wanted to talk about their past. So one of the things he said was that a lot of what people know about the Zuni is all BS, because the elders and the ones who came up before, who were telling the how do you say it, the wide eyes, the white man, the wide eyes, they would just tell them stories, whatever they wanted to hear, whatever got them out of their face. They just make up a story and tell them. So a lot of the information that we have about their customs and their culture is all made up. The reason why they want him to step down, or that why they kind of booted him out, is he did mention stuff about, let's see, where do I have it here? My notes are very all over the place. History of the Japanese and Chinese living with the Zuni as early as the 1200s, with Chinese first and I think it was the 15 or 1600s that they're first mention of the Japanese. There's actually a book by one of the Zuni. I think he was Zuni. His name's John Rushkemp Jr., and it's Chinese symbols in Zuni petroglyphs.
Wow.
So it's known, like, in the guy's like, what do you mean, like?
I'm gonna have to get that book.
Yeah, me too. He's like, you mean like they look Chinese? He's like, no, it's Chinese petroglyphs.
Well,
but
go ahead.
The NPS, the National Park Service, and the government bought all this land. He said when he was a kid, it wasn't uncommon for him to be out in the desert and there just be people out there with guns just shooting the petroglyphs off the rocks, just blasting the faces of the rocks off to just eliminate the culture.
So I'll say before you move forward, there is part of this book does touch on it, but I wouldn't do it justice, about how the Spanish came in and eventually there was an uprising, and that's a story, but it's a story that I wouldn't do it justice. So people would, if you're interested, look for that story, which I didn't touch on.
Right.
The other interesting thing is I did mention glazed pottery and smelting. Well, one of the items that was mentioned in the book is that, or I shouldn't say smelting, like metalwork, is that yes, this was prevalent in China at the time, but there was no connection to China other than a reference that, hey, the Chinese were practicing this. Right. And so it was known, so that knowledge could have been shared to other cultures in that region.
Yeah. And if the Chinese, if there were Chinese who came over and were integrating and interacting with the Olmecs, that's only, a couple hundred miles difference from New Mexico to the Four Corners region. It's not that far. And, the Olmecs were in South America, right? So
I think they were South America.
Yeah, so that's a little bit further distance, but that's still they made it across the ocean.
There's also, well, I don't want to say there's evidence, but there's been talk that I've heard of, could be rumors or could be people trying to make something that there's not, that says there could have been a trade route. If, like you said, if somebody's going to come across the Pacific, it really wouldn't be much for people to go north.
No. And I find it hard to believe, with even what evidence you can kind of find, that there was not trade, that North America and South America were just completely unknown. They obviously, they were seafaring nations, seafaring civilizations way earlier than we think. And I always try to, when people question that, I just think, if we've been around for what we think 40,000 years, Homo sapiens, right? 40 to 50,000 years, somewhere around there, we think. And we're just getting technological advancements in the last 200 years. What were we doing for the first 39,000 years? Yeah, and we couldn't have been that stupid for that long and survive.
And that's where you think about, as far as what we know. So if you think about the Japanese culture and how they had this tradition of making swords where they would bend metal, that's what we know. And they were masters to a point where other people couldn't necessarily figure out or duplicate it. But they were, and so what else happened that we have no idea what happened and where did the knowledge go? Or it could have been just simply maybe there was something devastating that happened.
Right.
I didn't hear that. I'm going to have to take a look at that book. I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah.
I was trying very hard not to go away from this necessarily, because it was a lot to chew on. And I have to give her credit if she was thinking about this in the 1960s. And today you can't really say much, but back then, I couldn't imagine if she was talking to people about this, they must have thought, who knows what they would have thought.
Or maybe they're more open to it. Look,
today you can't say.
Oh, you could
you
no,
can't
no, no.
say that much.
You can't change narrative now. So the reason Mahudi was really in trouble with the other elders wasn't stuff about the Japanese. Like they don't really want their secrets known. But what he was really talking more about is that the Zuni do in their rituals. So in their memories, because that's how they continue their stories, is in their rituals. There is evidence that points to knowledge of the Great Flood. They also say that probably just ending. We're probably just beginning the fifth world at this point. So we're in the fourth era at this time when he did this interview. And this is something that is shared between the Zuni and the Hopi. The story of what I heard, the story of the beginning of man, beginning of the Zuni.
From the Hopi?
No, from the Zuni. From this Zuni elder. Now, he didn't say anything about the twin gods, which I did. Ahayuta,
exactly.
Ahayuta, I'm going to say. I didn't find any specific names, but I did find the Ahayuta. I didn't find anything about them, or he didn't mention them. But what he did mention was this is going to sound familiar.
Yeah.
Lemuria.
No.
Pan. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So what he was talking about was that Lemuria, or Mu, it's also known as Pan. It's known as
right.
Was inhabited by androgynous beings who were not human. The island sank, and as they knew it was coming, so as the island sank, they scattered, and they went to all the continents, right? Because Lemuria is supposedly in like the Indian and Pacific Ocean, like a huge landmass, and some stories actually say that Easter Island was a part of it or part of that island chain. So a little tie back to last week. As the inhabitants fled, though, many of the children were lost. They drowned. They fell to the sea. And these children became all of the creatures of the sea. Dolphins and whales and fish. And then by the time they got to land, they basically made it to what he believes is like the Yucatan Peninsula, and then it spread from there. That the people from Lemuria even settled on Mount Shasta, and then there was somehow, I'm not sure how, because it's kind of scattered his story, but he also talks about the Star People and how the Star People came to help and created, like when you see these petroglyphs of the long, elongated skull, there's like people with like long skulls or very like squat beings. That those were either the Star People themselves or enhanced or hybridized creatures to help assist from Lemuria to land to like human life. And then doesn't really say what happened to him, other than
but this is
not allowed to talk about it.
Right. So this is what Mahudi believes, if I'm saying that correctly.
Right. Yeah, Mahudi. And then the guy did ask. Oh, he also mentioned that after the Zuni and the other tribes and the other humans basically got their sea legs, right? They knew what they were doing. There was a catastrophe, and the Inner Earth people, also known as the Ant people, went back underground. And these were like 2 to 4 foot tall beings. The shorter ones were kind of translucent, and the taller ones were kind of reddish. And this guy's like, what do you mean by like, what did they look like? And he's like, take a close up picture of an ant. He's like, and then compare it to an alien. He's like, that's what you got. And he's like, this isn't something that's new. Like all these UFO sightings and all these things that happen. He goes, we already know about this. He said they're interdimensional. They live within the earth, but they're interdimensional. And we just know this. And they're pissed because we're screwing up the planet. And if they come back, we're in trouble. Now, this was in 2020.
I was just going to say, that was in 2020.
This is just at the beginning of the pandemic. And he's like, they're going to come back and we have some communication, but they're pissed. And this guy says, well, being that the Zuni had a great understanding of the stars and the sky, he's like, is there anything you can tell me about Stonehenge-like structures in the Americas that were built by the Zuni? And he basically said, I can't tell you. I've been forewarned not to give that information out, and my life has been threatened.
Somebody doesn't want him to talk.
Somebody doesn't want him talking. Now, and this guy, like, he seemed pretty with it. Like, I mean, he was like 67 at the time.
Well, I mean, I could also, playing devil's advocate, if you're like on a council and you start talking about how we don't know our traditions and, there's ant people and I could understand how they might say, hey, you need to step down.
Yeah, but
devil's advocate.
That's nothing.
But there's the Hopi people, don't the Hopi have the same?
Yeah, the Hopi people have the star people right. And the ant people, and they have very similar stories. But this is coming from the Zuni, and they're like,
right.
They just don't. They want basically all these stories squashed, and probably because, and from what he didn't say this specifically, but the gist of it I got is it hurts their profits. Like they can make money right now. And this is going to hurt their profits, so you got to shut up.
Oh, or they just want to keep their knowledge. Maybe they're the chosen people. Like,
maybe.
Hey, don't tell our secrets.
They're not even using it themselves, apparently, from what he's saying. Like they don't, like if they do a ritual, he's like, he was calling it wham bam thank you ma'am ceremonies. He's like, they come and they say a couple of words, they flash some stuff, and they're not even going through the motions anymore. Like they don't even want to perpetuate it.
Interesting. There are images in this book of certain I don't want to say like I'd say gear, like outfits and things that they would wear for ceremonies, ceremonial outfits. But I didn't really touch on ceremonies other than from what the book said is that they are continued. But again, this book is older.
Yeah.
And but what I think is interesting,
very, very limitedly.
And what I also, one of the things I found was interesting is that, let's just put it in perspective. If she started having this idea in the 60s, it came out in the 80s, there's a book about it. I've never heard of this.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it. So so if this is something that is actually documented and printed, if you're talking about stories and just people telling tales, who knows what stories were lost or what rituals they used to perform.
Yeah. And even he says, I don't know that he was trying to say, certainly that, there's, any of this stuff is real, but it's the way it's passed down through their stories, and it could mean anything. But even at that, they don't want it shared.
Right. And the Hopi, I have a map here, but I don't have it highlighted. But the Hopi are in the region, right?
The Hopi are, they're in Arizona,
right.
New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah, I believe.
Right. And like this story, at least their story, that according to this, is that eventually people went north, south, and east. So it could be remnants of the same cultures in those stories. It could be,
And it's
so
like, what are the words I'm actually looking for here? How do you prove, or how do you, if those stories are being eliminated, other than if you could do some kind of DNA testing? Of course, they should be similar DNA. How fine of a test do you need to do to find where the differences are? I mean, if we can still find Neanderthal DNA in current humans, would it be that hard to find, Chinese or Japanese DNA?
Right.
Would it even show up? Has it been too long? Is there not enough? But you think after tens of thousands of years, we still have Neanderthal DNA. You think that test would have been run by now? I would think so.
If you're making such a stretch, that has cultural implications, and especially today, individuals may have taken tests, individual, let's just say, ancestry tests. But as a peoples, I don't think there has, at least not that I'm aware of, an actual study done to do, let's just say, if you're thinking about a statistical, portion of the population, to see what is there, and then even try to connect it to other parts of Japan or the region.
Well, a quick search shows someone definitely confirming the fact that DNA testing proves that the various Pueblo peoples are related to the Anasazi. Now that was my first result off of the internet, so that could be completely wrong, but it would seem that there should be some similarities there.
Well, and like this story says, that they were traveling.
Yeah.
Before they settled, they were traveling, and they met. According to the book, according to their legends, that they met various peoples, and some of those were, integrated, or I shouldn't say integrated with the Zuni, but maybe they merged. So it happened, and and that could explain a lot of different things as far as population moves, or what happened, why some people left, and some people, it shouldn't even say left, maybe they just moved. Well,
if they were searching for, what did they call it, the middle, so if they were searching for a specific place, and they're not going to be happy until they find it, or they find what matches what they think they're looking for, and then once they find that spot, that's where they stop moving. But until that point, they're just going to move around until they find the spot they like.
And let's just say that if there's all these legends about all these earthquakes and natural disasters, then I would put faith in it, because if you're in a spot where you're settled and you have homes and you have crops and there's water, something's going to make you move.
Yeah.
And that would have to be something pretty serious. Now, I didn't look into that volcanic eruption. That's kind of interesting.
Well, when I was in Arizona a couple years ago, I mean, we did hike in an extinct volcano, and a lot of the buttes and mountains there in that high desert from Flagstaff north are just the remnants of volcanoes. So yeah, I could absolutely see that being the case.
And I also try to always put it in perspective that, let's just say 10,000 years ago, if I'm correct on this, that there were, let's just say, I don't say woolly mammoths, but rhinos and giraffes. There were America didn't look the same way.
No.
And that's 10,000 years ago, which seems like a lot. But we're talking about a story from a few thousand years ago. So what was it like a few thousand years ago compared to today?
Yeah.
So it could have been a beautiful landscape where there was a lot of food, a lot of water, a lot of animals. So in order for you to not think you found, your destination, it would have to be something pushing you.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned woolly mammoths, because in that same interview, they did talk about, and I got to look into this to see if it's true, or this may not be true at all, just in this interview, but they did talk about where in Russia, so this had to be back in 2020, maybe 2019, they uncovered remnants of a settlement from early human. They didn't say if it was Homo sapien or if it was Neanderthal, or someone else, but they were just saying hunter gatherers. So they're nomadic. They don't stay in one place. But they were finding these small structures that were made from mammoth bones. But then they found this one that was made from the bones of 60 mammoths. Now, mammoths are huge. And they said this thing was massive in scale. And they don't, it's similar to like Mayan culture, where they would build these giant structures for these like feasting rituals. And it was similar, they said. But I didn't look into it. I mean, I just heard it in passing in that interview, but I kind of wrote it down like I got to look into this. But if they were hunting mammoths and then taking their bones and building some kind of structure out of 60 mammoths, like how big? I didn't see the picture, but how big does this structure have to be? And it's another instance of a culture that supposedly didn't do these things. But now we're finding that, they did do these things.
Yeah.
So it's all what we think we know.
Right. It's all, they couldn't have done that because we don't have a picture of it.
Right.
Or, today that wouldn't even mean anything.
That wouldn't even mean anything. Now, this was in this was in Siberia. So it was kind of preserved in the ice. But imagine if they did something like that in the South and Southwest, but they were using wood or stone, and it's been destroyed.
Yeah, it'd be destroyed.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the Chaco, is it the Chaco Cavern? I should know this. That's where the Anasazi is.
Oh, is this the huge cavern that has its own clouds and
there's
like massive structure?
There is a, and I believe it's a national park, but the Chaco Cavern. If you look at some of the structures out there, they're just what you find now is impressive.
Yeah.
And if you think about a people that were building, let's just say they were building out of using mud and dirt mortar, then what would be left? I mean, the cliff dwellings are there.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of erosion. I mean, they're slowly going away.
Slowly, yeah. And I was in some in Walnut Canyon, some of the Pueblo cliff dwellings in Arizona, and that's the Walnut Canyon National Monument, where you can hike down to the canyon, you come around a corner, and there's all these structures that were built in the cliffs, and they were really cool and fairly well preserved, to the point where there's still some of the original timber left too.
Wow.
So it was really, really cool to see.
There's also, I want to say, I can't remember where I saw it. I want to say it was in England. There's been some, is a YouTube channel, and I'll have to find it. You can put it in the notes, where there are some folks out there who are still going around and looking at some of these older sites. And a lot of the henges that you might find from wood, a wood henge. So you don't really find anything other than you come across a hole, and the only reason you know it's a hole is because there's different dirt in it.
Yeah.
Like the dirt looks different.
Yeah.
But you would never even know it was there if you couldn't find these spots where it looks like they had posts.
Yeah. And some of them are massive. Like they've built cities on top of some of them, and it's like whole neighborhoods were once these stone henges or these wood henges, and you can kind of see where the outlines are, because there's still like maybe there's like a stone structure in the center, and that's still there in like a park. And then if they do sound penetrating radar, they can see where the soil, the ground is different underneath it, and they're massive, these structures.
Yeah, and so you think about, and that's what we talk about now, and you think about how long ago a wood henge would have been. So even if you're talking 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, it's the same time. Mm-hmm. It's just a different people in a different location.
Yeah.
So there could have been different structures, and we would never know, because now in the Southwest, it's more desert-like. So who knows what would have happened? Like that, that erosion could have just taken it away.
Yep.
Where in other like Siberia, ice or snow could have covered it.
Yep.
And in these other climates, dirt just covers it.
Well, think about how many times we're out on our travels and we see an old house. It's been 9 years. Every year we've gone up to the same two parks in the fall.
Right.
Like I pulled up the photos every year. Right. And we came back a different way this year than we have in a few years. And there's a couple old buildings that are just almost gone that were standing 2 years ago. That's a modern house that's just gone. Thousands of years later, there's not going to be much left unless it's stone. But even that's going to erode and get buried, and you have to know where to look.
And how would you know? Except for stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excavating.
And if you, right, that's the only way you're going to know. So it's to me, it's fascinating to think that people still believe a narrative exclusively based on just what we know. Well, this has to be it because that's what we know. It's like, well, you don't really know. Like, if you look at Stonehenge, well, the stones came from a different spot. And if they've identified that, okay, you know that. But you have no idea how they got them there, or when they moved them, or really when it was.
When or why.
You just don't, why? You don't know.
Yeah. I mean, this guy was saying, this Mahudi was saying that he says, you think the Egyptians built those pyramids? He goes, no, they were there when they got there. Like, this guy was all over he had information about everything. And I
gotta look that up.
It was really cool. I'll send you a link to it. I'll pull the podcast and I'll send you the link to it. It was really cool. But it goes to show that we don't know. And we only know really what we're allowed to know, or what the narrative says we're supposed to know. And if you go against that, then you get shot down, you get called a nut job, you don't get funding for your research. And it doesn't just happen here. It happens all over the place. Anywhere where there was, indigenous people, and now, it happens everywhere. That if you try to change that narrative now, and you're taking away, rights or beliefs or a culture, whether you're trying to help or not, you get shut down. If it's not the narrative that either that culture wants you to believe, or the culture that's taking it over wants you to believe, whoever's got the stronger pull in that situation, if you're trying to tell, even if it's the truth, something different, you're going to get shut down.
History is written by the victors, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, anymore by the richest.
That's usually evident.
Whoever's got the most dough.
Yeah. Right. So it was interesting. It was an interesting story. I'm glad I finally read it. Yeah. I've had the book for a little bit now, a couple of years, and I pick it up and I put it down. So I'm glad I actually read through it.
Now you got to start your next book.
I have another couple of things here.
Cool.
But a book, an actual big book, I don't know about. I think I'll take some time and do something fun.
Yeah. It's fun though. I mean, I like doing the research because that's how you learn, and it keeps me off of TV. It keeps me from doing dumb stuff. And, even if what I learn winds up changing later because new information comes, it's worth it, because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
You can only learn what you have put in front of you, and then make your own decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, well, again, we're different because I just like the story.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I like the information too, but I'm a big fan of a bunch of people got in a boat. How many people? I don't know, 20. How many people are going to fit in a boat? Yeah, you figure in 1000 AD, how big were the boats? I don't know. So boats came across the Pacific, and then decided to travel through the desert. I think that's a really interesting story.
The boats could have been big. We don't know.
Could have been. No.
You know, just because they were made out of wood doesn't mean they weren't big.
Again, what do we not know?
There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. But that's all we know for this episode.
Yeah, we've been talking a while. That's true.
You didn't think you were going to be able to fill an episode with that. That was...
No.
It was good.
Parts of it were very academic and...
hey, we got a smart audience, so I'm not worried about that.
Well, just, I don't want this to sound wrong, but it was academic and some of it felt dry. And, reading about the formations of teeth, wasn't planning on that. So some of it was, a little bit of a push, or easy if you just kind of glanced at it. But it was a good story.
It's a good story, and that's what it's all about. Well, that's all. I didn't really do much this episode. I just listened to an interview with a elder, and then listened to you talk. So I got nothing left.
Well, I got nothing left either because I'm done talking.
All right. So I'll put the links to some. I got the link to the book. I'll put that in there. So if anybody's interested in looking at it, I don't know if it's hard copy only. It may be. And then I found some links to, as you were talking, I was trying to pull links on some stuff. So I'll throw some links down the bottom, and you can do your own research if you want to learn more about the Zuni. And thank you for listening. If you guys want to get in contact with us, it is podcast@primitiveintelligence.com. Well, there's Instagram. I do have Instagram. I've been throwing up taking some clips of the podcasts and doing some digital art, and then overlaying the digital art with the clips and then putting them up. Just like little short things. But
you should put a picture of the original monkey in there.
Oh yeah, you did send me that picture. Is he in your shop there? Or in your studio?
Yeah, he's in the office. Yeah.
You should.
I wouldn't be able to show it to you on video because I'd have to turn this thing around.
You should put a little shelf behind you and put him up there.
I'll put him back here.
Yeah, put him back there.
Yeah. You can stare at me.
Yeah, I'll put a picture of him in the show notes too. So that's going to do it for this week. See ya.
See you later.